I don't know if you're ready to get evil or not, bro, but it's time to get villainous up in here.
I am ready. I'm born ready. Sterling, we're doing our top 5 villains. Every week we do a top 5. This one is villains. Like, I don't know what else to say. It's so straightforward. We didn't discuss our lists beforehand except for our shared honorable mention, which is something we do sometimes, but not always. So if you would like to let the good people know what our honorable mention is, Sterling, we can get straight into it.
The honorable mention chosen by both Tyler and I on the Star Road podcast is Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII. The one-winged angel.
That's right.
Himself.
I feel like it's oftentimes, and this is definitely the case here, we will do a shared honorable mention because it's so emblematic of the category and it's such a given that it's just getting it out of the way, not in a negative way, but like it's so in your face that we just talk about it together as our shared, and you know, that's how we do it. But I think Sephiroth is the perfect example of that because he is just an interesting, broody, cool villain that you just love to hate and is perfect for the story that he's in.
And people love when they can relate to the villain.
Totally.
And Sephiroth in some ways is justified in his negativity.
Absolutely.
You know, his situation is not what most people had to deal with, you know. I mean, he's basically an experiment, you know. And I could see that getting to you. Maybe, you know, he went a little overboard, but I could certainly see it getting to you.
Yeah.
Anyway, in presentation, in the whole package, Sephiroth is iconic as a villain, as an antagonist in general. So we get him out of the way, not to get him out of the way, but because it's almost guaranteed overlap on these lists.
Absolutely.
So Tyler, I would love if you would kick us into the main 5 with your number 5.
My number 5 is Neo Cortex from Crash Bandicoot.
Really?
Why not?
Why not is a good question. He didn't see it coming.
I'm a big Crash boy. You know this. Neo Cortex was the villain of the very first Crash game and other ones, obviously, after. He's kind of the main series, you know, villain for the whole franchise. But he's just such a goofy, like, slapstick, bad, good villain where he makes a lot of things happen, but he never ultimately achieves his goal. And that's exactly what I needed when I was, you know, 4, 5, 6 years old, to have a villain that kind of, you know, was enjoyable, but you never really felt like he ever had a chance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. You knew Crash was gonna wreck it.
Yeah, definitely. So that's my pick, Neo Cortex, Crash Bandicoot. Shout out to Naughty Dog. What's your number 5, Sterling?
My number 5 I'm going to do in this slot because it's a collective. It's not a single entity.
Okay.
And that's the Umbrella Corporation from the Resident Evil series.
That is an interesting one.
It's hard to pinpoint a villain in Resident Evil when all roads go back to Umbrella.
Absolutely. Some would say Wesker, right? I feel like that is like...
Yeah, you could say Wesker.
I feel like it's part and parcel, though. It's kind of one and the same.
I just feel like there was a lot more evil going on in Umbrella than just Wesker. It went much further than him.
That's absolutely true. That's a good point.
I got a lot of insight in some of the cutscenes in the RE makes. You get a lot of insight into what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Okay.
Just you see people that might have been good at one point turn very terrible.
Well, that's a great pick because Umbrella is almost a cultural icon as an antagonist to the point where you see Umbrella merchandise. I remember seeing people back in the day when we first got on Facebook, their job was, whatever at Umbrella Corporation.
Literally, yep.
So I totally feel that.
It just had to be. You start thinking about villains in Resident Evil, and that's where my mind went early on in the thinking, Yeah. And I said, why not just the Umbrella Corporation? Just the evil surrounding it.
I'm glad you did.
Thank you, bro. I'm glad I can make you happy on today's episode.
It's because I couldn't pick a Resident Evil villain myself.
I was going to go with Mr. X because he is a son of a bitch. Plain and simple.
No question.
But I needed more reasoning behind it than him just being a fucking asshole.
Yep.
And for that, I picked Umbrella Corp.
My number 4 is a villain that we actually love to hate in all of his appearances, and that's King K. Rool.
I should have known this was going to be on your list, bro.
He almost in the same vein as Neo Cortex. I feel like I'm seeing a trend here. Like,
you're a quirky boy today. That's what it is.
I don't know. I kind of like these villains that are so goofy that they're almost lovable. I think that's what it is. You love King K. Rool, even though he's doing some terrible, terrible things, just because he's so slapstick and ridiculous.
Especially if you watch the old Donkey Kong 3D animated series. K. Rool definitely shines there.
I don't know if that's canon. I don't know.
I don't know how canon that is, but you know what? It's canon to my childhood, bro. This is all about childhood for the most part.
Yeah. But yeah, man, King K. Rool, again, just feels so perfect for this list. Such a good villain for a kid's game. Just to be this goofy embodiment of just motivationless evil. You know what I mean? Definitely.
Very fitting, bro. I just knew I was thinking Donkey Kong, and that's the only pick there really was at the end of the day. And I just couldn't go with it.
Of course.
But like I said, you're a quirky boy today, so thanks for picking the ones I wouldn't have.
It only gets worse from here, I'll tell you that.
Oh, man. My next one, not exactly a main antagonist, but Helgenish from Octopath Traveler.
That's a good one.
Probably the biggest piece of shit in gaming, and that's why he's on this list. He is not a main character. He's very central to Primrose's storyline.
Yeah,
but he is just a bastard. I mean, dude, if I could fight somebody in a game, it would be this guy.
Yeah.
I've talked before about how Octopath Traveler really touches on some graphic subject matter.
Definitely.
And this guy is basically some piece of shit pimp. He's got me so mad, dude, I can't even contain it. He's a piece of shit pimp running this strip club. I'm not going to spoil Primrose's story. You should definitely fire into that one first and foremost amongst them. I think it's the most intense. But, Primrose goes from royalty to, I guess, riches to rags. Finds herself at this terrible place with this terrible man, and there's some abuse that's, insinuated. And through dialogue and through cutscenes, you just see how terrible this person is. Now, we'll see. If you play along, you'll see whether or not he gets his just desserts. And whether or not it's extremely satisfying. But I just had to shout out the biggest piece of shit in gaming I can think of on a villain list.
Absolutely.
That's why Helgenish is here. Fuck you, Helgenish.
Yeah. Idiot.
What you got for us, bro? Let's move it on.
My number 3, this is actually, it's not going to feel too different from my first 2, but hear me out. And I'm feeling very retro with my list. I got to be honest with you. It's Giovanni.
Man, you're like an open book. Giovanni.
Yeah. Giovanni. And here's why. Pokemon, the main series games, are full of villains that are dumb, right? Like, these teams most of the time are really terrible at their jobs, and like they don't accomplish anything ultimately, and like Yeah, they're just comical. Team Rocket in the Gen 1 games, and even really just in the Gen 1 games, Giovanni, he is a bad man doing some bad things, orchestrating some serious crime and succeeding for quite a while at it before he ultimately gets foiled.
Yeah, being pretty terrible to people and Pokemon, man. Just a piece of garbage.
Yep. And he doesn't even really get foiled. I mean, he loses a couple battles to the main character and then he disappears. And he
just decides to fuck off. Yeah.
He's as far as I know, maybe I'm missing some lore element, but I don't think he ever gets heard from again. As far as I know, he's still in hiding.
He just gets in a spaceship with Persian and goes to Mars.
But yeah, so for that reason, where like it's so mysterious because you never hear his downfall, and then through implied dialogue alongside other, canon elements from later, you find out that he actually is the father of Silver. From Gen 2, and that adds an entire extra layer of interest to his story. But yeah, Giovanni, very mysterious, very very interesting character to me. Maybe it's just because it was one of the first villains that I couldn't quite wrap my head around. You know what I mean? Where they're not an open book and they're not a slapstick kind of silly villain.
Definitely. That's another one that was on the edges of my mind, because you think obvious things, Resident Evil, Pokemon, these things that are
everyday conversations for us. Yeah.
And of course, Giovanni comes up first, but I'm glad you picked him. Very fitting. No one can forget the moment you realize that he was Silver's father, and it's just you and your Game Boy screen and your contemplation of life.
Yep, because it's never really expressly stated, but you can kind of put it together. You can kind of piece it together. So, yeah.
We love the mystery.
Definitely.
Speaking of mysterious villains, Monica from Doki Doki Literature Club.
Just Monica.
Just Monica, dude.
Man, here's where I'm like, how much should we say in talking about the character?
We don't have to go into story or anything, but I think we can talk about the elements of the interaction. I mean, it's definitely worth noting. This is a different type of interface than what you're used to when interacting with a villain in a game.
No question.
That's the reason for her being on the list. I mean, plain and simple.
It's very innovative. The character design is something that has never, or I guess had never been done before, like at that time.
You feel personally attacked. And that is something that games do not normally provide.
That's correct.
We're talking, like files in your computer being messed with.
That's very interesting.
Very interesting. You suddenly, there's a moment or two where you might ask yourself, what have I gotten myself into?
Yeah, there are elements of this that really hit home for people like us who came up seeing technology and kind of the rise of computer viruses, just the computers in general, as home entertainment devices. Like, we've really seen the majority of that progression, right? So this hits hard when you get into this game, getting into modifying your system, like modifying files for the game and everything. Like, I think that's a really good point.
And the things you can find within the game's files. There's just a lot. The game itself is a whole nother thing, but I think Monica as the centerpiece villain, the evil force. It's so funny, but one thing I do want to say while we're on the subject, Doki Doki Literature Club is not what it appears from an outside marketing perspective.
Yeah. Period.
It looks like something that it isn't. I will just say that.
Correct.
But Monica, man, had to be on the list.
I agree. It's a good pick because that last sequence with her is just so iconic. Like, you can still see the detail of that scene in your mind's eye, even not having played that game, recently.
Always. That background, I'll never forget the background
Definitely.
of that final interaction.
Yep. So if you played the game, you know exactly what we're talking about. But if you haven't, it's free on Steam. It is extremely disturbing. You should play it if that's cool with you. Definitely.
As long as that's cool with you, it is very disturbing.
Yeah. There is some extremely graphic content and some extremely disturbing imagery and dialogue. But if you're like us and that is cool for you, then you should play it. It's free.
Yep. And speaking of dying, I'm dying to hear what you got next.
Well, I'm glad you asked, Sterling. My number 2 is a meme at this point. Like we're just gonna get it out of here. My number 1, I promise, is a really genuine pick.
Okay.
My number 2 is Tom Nook because, and hear me out on this.
Oh, I'm hearing you.
I know if you had only ever played Animal Crossing New Horizons, you would not really understand this, in my opinion. But in the first couple iterations of Animal Crossing, you really get the sense that Tom Nook is a borderline bad character, as in exploiting you for, everything basically. And I feel like that gets lost over the years, and his character has softened a little bit over the years, right? Which is natural. Any villain, a lot of the time, as they age, they get softer. That tends to happen. Not always, but sometimes.
I would be shocked if I didn't think about Nook already in this context. But it's funny you say New Horizons, because there's actually text in New Horizons that I've seen come up, my girl's seen come up from residents here and there, where they kind of shatter the fourth wall and start to be like, what's up with Tom Nook? He just gets all the money and we just sell our shit back to him, and it's just a never ending cycle.
That's interesting.
So it's funny that even some of the residents, whether they're pre-programmed or not, would have any awareness of Tom Nook potentially being sketchy.
I love that, though.
I love it too. That's why it makes it the best pick so far, in my opinion.
What about you, man? You got a number 2?
I got a number 2. It is the hero from Moon.
Ah, yes. You've told me all about this. I'm still intrigued to play this game, man.
Yep. Also known as Moon Remix RPG Adventure in Japan. This is an interesting standout one because of the nature of the game. It's an anti-RPG where the villain is who you would normally play. Let's say it's Link. You're an innocent being standing on the outskirts watching a hero like Link walking around and really just murdering innocent creatures that did nothing wrong. He's just grinding XP. He's doing what we do, and it brings this existential element to the table.
Yeah.
And it gets you to look at video games in a different way. So this implementation of seeing the hero, really us, that's really us that we're looking at, being so cold, so emotionless, and then on top of that, getting the intimate details about who they've killed. So all these creatures are random, species of creatures, just, nonsense almost. But when you go up upon their corpse, you can read about them. You can literally know things about them. It might say that they like nacho cheese.
Yeah.
There's a lot of funny dialogue that I've sat and laughed for minutes at in this game. But you get that other side of lore behind the characters, and then you understand. It's like it gets your mind going to where you sympathize with the enemies. Definitely. And you really turn your negative attention towards the quote unquote hero.
Yeah. And that's the story, right? I mean, it's so funny to have a villain list where one of the characters is named Hero.
Yeah, the hero. And he's somebody that's feared by everybody. It's almost like when this kid, wherever, is getting on the game, they're like, oh my God, the hero's here. Hide. Very interesting. Great implementation. Kind of the scariest villain you could think of in the context of a video game.
Definitely.
But are we down to number ones, bro?
That's it, man. That's it. And it's going to be a franchise that will shock nobody for me.
Let me guess. I can already hear you saying it, so just say it.
It's Liquid Snake / Revolver Ocelot from Metal Gear Solid.
Absolutely.
Now, why do I have two characters in one slot, Sterling? Well, I'll tell you. They are one character in the end. I don't want to get too much into it. Spoiler alert for a game from 1996, but Liquid Snake is Snake's biological brother, twin, whatever you want to call it. Solid Snake's like his counterpart, right? Revolver Ocelot is a really badass dude who shoots a gun good. And Revolver Ocelot, I believe, and I could be getting this wrong, it's been a while since I played MGS1, but I believe what happens is Revolver Ocelot loses his shooting arm and grafts Liquid Snake, who died, grafts his arm onto himself, Revolver Ocelot, and then Liquid's essence basically takes over Revolver Ocelot. And you learn this because Revolver Ocelot, who's an American, just starts speaking with an old British man accent, and just starts, it's basically just like the return of Liquid Snake, but he's actually badass. So I think I may be mixing up some things here, but that's the gist of it. He's
badass nonetheless.
It's badass, and it's a great storyline, and it's very emblematic of what you get from these Metal Gear Solid games. And pretty much the entire franchise of MGS 1 through 4 is predicated on the dynamic between Solid Snake and Liquid Snake, and it's awesome. I really love the character. There's a very cathartic ending to MGS4 that I won't get into, but it just sort of is the crescendo of the two as old men at this point, and just that's the whole story, is just getting old, and I think it's awesome.
If you hadn't said Metal Gear Solid by number 2, I knew number 1 was it. No question.
It's just a game with such great villains. And you could pick... we did a top 5 bosses, I believe, as well. And I had a really hard time picking which Metal Gear Solid boss would be the one, because the game is famous for its interesting and unique boss fights. First and foremost, I would say. So, yeah, I don't know. This was not as hard a choice because Liquid is like the primary antagonist of the game. There are other cool antagonists, but those are more just regular bosses, right? They're more individual stories.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I'm going with. That's my number 1. Love Metal Gear Solid, Hideo Kojima. I wish that he was still involved with the franchise, but I also think that some things are best ended, you know.
Absolutely. I don't think you could see my number 1 coming from any direction.
I have no notion of what it is, so I can't wait to see what you got.
I think it's something that you're going to have a lot to say on.
Okay.
Skull Kid from Majora's Mask.
That's a great one, actually. Yeah, that's a great one. When you think antagonist, I mean, that whole character, and it's like, you know, it's multiple forms. Like, it feels like the most antagonistic thing there is. It's basically the incarnation of a nightmare.
Truly. I mean, we're talking about, you know, young boy finds ancient power and apocalypse ensues. That is a very detrimental storyline.
Definitely.
We talk about the appeal with Majora's Mask to us, with the brooding nature of it, the constant awareness that there's time is limited. And all the while Skull Kid sits on that tower and is just waiting to bring the moon down. There's a lot to say about it, but it is, to me, a clear number 1.
Definitely.
And it's funny because he never started out as this terrible person.
No.
As a matter of fact, I mean, there's a lot of innocence and in some cases some good-hearted nature like shown about him. But he comes upon a mask and everything changes. So, it's funny because we talked about tragic backstories. Skull Kid would have been a perfect fit.
Definitely.
Because this isn't something that he technically intended. He just stumbled upon an ancient evil.
Yep.
But in doing so became what I consider to be one of the big boys in gaming villains.
Absolutely, man. I think that's a great pick.
Thank you, bro. I appreciate that. And I appreciate this list.
It was an interesting one. A lot of stuff from you I didn't expect. And, a lot of stuff from me that would be pretty typical, but you know what? It had to be done.